Hey everybody, it's Captain Kyle. I'm here at DragonCon with the immensely talented author, Robert Day Sawyer. You may have read his Flashforward, Calculating God, Mindscan, the Oppenheimer Alternative, and my personal favorite, the Neanderthal Parallax. How are you enjoying the con?
So DragonCon is overwhelming because it's 80,000 people, but buried within that 80,000 people, there are a couple of thousand serious science fiction readers. You have to look to find them. We're in the sub-basement of the Hyatt, which shows where maybe we go in the pecking order at this mostly media, mostly comic convention. But 2,000 serious readers is not to be sneezed at. And so I always enjoy DragonCon. I don't go to the media presentations as much as I am a Star Trek fan and so forth, but I enjoy hanging out with the other authors and definitely meeting other readers like you, my friend.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I was a top reader in sixth grade reading The Dragon Riders of Pern and Isaac Asimov and all that kind of stuff. Speaking of which, who were the authors that influenced you to get into science fiction?
So Arthur C. Clarke, number one, first and foremost. Not that he was the first one that I read. The first that I actually read was Alan E. It's pronounced Nurse, but spelled N-O-R-U-R-S-E. N-O-R-U-R-S-E. Alan E. Nurse. A juvenile in the vein of a Heinlein juvenile, but it just was a similar kind of novel called Trouble on Titan. Was the first science fiction novel I ever read, and that influenced me enormously, not so much because of the text of the story, although it's a great story, it's been reprinted many times, great novel, but because he begins it with an essay on the joys of being a science fiction writer. So you see, before I even became into reading my first science fiction novel, here was a guy saying, hey, this is the greatest job in the world. I had a blast doing this. This is fun. And you might do it too someday. And I thought, wow. So that invitation to be a science fiction writer, that he was a medical doctor, Dr. Alan E. Nurse, Dr. Nurse, yes, extended to me and all his other readers, was hugely influential. And then I went to see, I was born in 1960, so 1968, I went to see, well, not my own, my dad took me to see 2001: A Space Odyssey in first run in Cinerama, as it was meant to be seen. And of course, noted, even at 8 years old, that the screenplay was co-written by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke. Well, I tracked down even starting at 8 and later on Clarke's work, and he was absolutely the most influential. You mentioned Calculating God in your introduction, for instance, and it was Clarke that was the first writer to show me that you could have a novel that's rigorous science fiction and still deal with metaphysical issues, which he does, of course, in The Star, his short story, The Star, and his short story, The 9 Billion Names of God, in his novel, Childhood's End, and so forth. He was the one who said, no, you know, despite subsequently later on, Stephen Jay Gould saying that science and religion are non-overlapping magisteria, nothing in common. Clarke said, no, the big questions, you don't have to seed them, give them up to religion. Science fiction is a perfectly valid genre to be exploring the biggest philosophical, metaphysical issues. And he gave me that gift. I never met him. I met his brother, Fred. So I always say I met him genetically, half. I met half of him genetically, but never met him. But that would be the biggest influence, Clarke, Arthur Charles Clarke.
And I have to admit, I've read a ton of his stuff, and he is one of my influences. Asimov, of course, Heinlein, the list goes on and on. Your work, you often challenge preconceptions, and you often challenge, beliefs, and you sometimes dive into, as you say, the metaphysical, the nature of consciousness. Do you have a process for examining those beliefs and then coming at them at another angle or turning them on their head?
Well, I think science fiction is misnamed, and we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of it being named by Hugo Gernsback. In 1926, he named it first scientifiction, all one word, and then very quickly morphed to just the two words, science fiction. I think it's philosophical fiction. I don't think it's sci-fi. I think it's fi-fi. And so my whole life I've been intrigued by these, fundamental questions. Where did life come from? Why are we here? What is it? Is there any purpose to it at all? Certainly evolution, we know, is not teleological. It doesn't have a goal in mind, and yet somehow it ended up with conscious thinking beings through this random process of mutation and natural selection. And astonished that people don't spend a lot of their time thinking about those questions, because I do. I mean, we have the luxury in the Western industrialized West to have free time to think about things other than food and shelter. But those questions have always interested me, and yet I'm a skeptic and I'm an atheist, and I had zero interest in somebody pointing to some putatively holy text from thousands of years ago and say, oh, there's the answer. Somebody figured it out long ago. I kind of think you did if you didn't understand that the universe started with a big bang, if you didn't know about the genetic code, if you aren't aware of descent through modification through natural selection, if you don't understand that the universe is a quantum reality that collapses constantly into a given state when it's observed. If you didn't know those things 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years ago, I don't think you had a good grip on the answers. But today, we still don't have the answers, but I think we ask much more sophisticated and nuanced versions of the questions. And science fiction is the perfect genre to be exploring those issues in.
Well, I think you touch on something where a lot of people equate belief in God as in belief in the holy texts.
Right, absolutely.
And that's not always the case. I mean, I'm a believer that there's something that we don't understand, and I do not believe personally that the Bible is the definitive word of God. It has some good stuff in it. Don't get me wrong, but
and some bad stuff too, I gotta say.
And some, less than, getting kids torn apart by bears, not so good. But at the same time, evolution is a fact. And I had an argument with a atheist, and I said, well, it would be a poor creator who made his creations who couldn't evolve. And adapt to changing situations. But other than the entertainment value that we get from your books and, of course, your ability to, pay your bills, which is important.
I appreciate that.
What else do you hope that your written works accomplish?
Well, it's interesting because I really do want to accomplish something other than, yes, absolutely. My friend Spider Robinson says you're competing for the customer's beer money. You've got to give them entertainment. 100%, absolutely. But I want to get people to think beyond their preconceptions. I really do want to wake people up and have them say, oh, I never thought about evolution, the origin of life, consciousness, life after death, whether there's we live in a virtual reality or an actual physical reality in quite that way before. So the job of me is not to convince anybody. The job of I can't remember which one is right, is not to convince anybody. My job is not to convince anybody that I'm right, or my particular position, which is very malleable and certainly not set in stone on anything. I think that's the definition of being a rationalist instead of somebody who's driven by faith. Driven by faith, there's no changing of your opinion. Driven by rationalism, we learned this that we didn't know before. Well, then what I thought previously is no longer valid. Rationalism and the scientific method was what I was inculcated in as a young boy and how I live my life intellectually today. So my job is not to make you say, the universe, as the terminal experiment, which won the Nebula Award by a biomedical engineer that discovers scientific proof of the existence of the human soul. My job is not to try to convince anybody that souls exist or what their nature might be. It's to get you to think about, if, there is something separate from the body, what nature might it have if it didn't have eyes and salivary glands and couldn't smell and didn't have a stomach and didn't have a libido and because that's hormonally regulated? What would it be like, right? It's certainly not going to be just a little version of you with wings. It's going to be, what is it that is that essence of consciousness, if any consciousness separate from physicality, even remotely as a possibility might exist. So this is the kind of thing I want to do, is to spur people out of their own complacency on these issues and get them wanting to debate through reading my books and books by people who have other points of view, but also debate with their friends. I just read Calculating God by Robert J. Sawyer. I think he's full of beans. That's a great reaction to one of my books because you're talking about it. You feel energized to engage with somebody else about what was in one of my works.
So to sum it up, you want to help people open their minds. So not to have them so open that their brains fall out, but still have an open mind and be critical thinkers. Now, a lot of the characters that you create in these novels to tell these stories and to, show what rational people are occasionally, sometimes they're going through real life traumas. Like in Neanderthal Parallax, there was a rape, and
cancer, lung cancer.
Yeah, how do you examine the mindset of people who've gone through these traumas and to convey them in a convincing fashion?
Well, I've, of course, been fortunate enough not to have lung cancer myself, because if you get diagnosed, the time to death is pretty fast. My younger brother died of lung cancer, 13 years ago now, and I miss him. His name was Alan. But he hadn't been diagnosed when I wrote Calculating God either. I was just, Calculating God, which is a novel about an atheist paleontologist who was confronted by a theistic extraterrestrial who has come to Earth. And they have what I call it My Dinner with Andre the Alien. They have lots of interesting dialogues. That's the meat of the novel. Was a little sterile when I was writing it. And I realized there has to be some stakes here. The stakes aren't just who wins the intellectual debate, although that's fun. I watch Jeopardy every night to see who the winner is. The stakes had to be something personal for the paleontologist. And I thought, okay, around the time I was writing that, Stephen Jay Gould had gotten fatally ill and died. Carl Sagan had gotten fatally ill. As young men, by my standards today, as a guy who's 64, young men passed away, and they were two of the famous bastions of new atheism. And I had to ask myself, could you, as you were getting closer to metaphorically or literally meeting your maker, hold on to that hard edge? No, there's nothing. I'm just going to die. It's going to be 1 minute I'm there, and the next minute I'm gone. Or would there be some nuance? And given that question, I had to look for something that is, fatal, irretrievable, but let my character still function for the term of the story. And one of my favorite scenes, of course, in the novel is when the alien finally comes really to dinner at the paleontologist's house, and his son, the little boy, says, "You're from the stars. My dad has cancer. Why don't you cure him?" He says, "We don't know how to cure cancer either. We would if we could. We don't know how." And I thought, that was a really poignant moment. But the idea of having somebody in such extreme circumstances, that makes the emotions raw. And always, though, when I do anything like that, it's in service of a science fictional story. I never do it, sometimes you will read novels where there will be all kinds of horrible things, child abuse, rape, murder, whatever it is, because the author didn't think of anything else that was worthwhile. It was always thematically related. You mentioned the rape, which is very brief, page and a half, and in Hominids. But it's a novel about, the trilogy is a love story in large measure about a Homo sapiens sapiens, one of us, women, who becomes involved with a Homo sapiens neanderthalensis or Homo neanderthalensis, depending on how you parse the taxonomy, a Neanderthal man. And I wanted part of him to be my emblematic version of non-toxic masculinity. And because I abhor the horrible things that my gender has been responsible for thousands. Not everybody. There are very many good men. They're good men, right? There have always been good men. And but the deeds of the bad men have been horrific and countenanced, allowed, tolerated for so many millennia. I wanted to say, no, here, is a way to be. Ponter is completely masculine, completely confident, intelligent, brilliant man, caring of animals, he has a pet dog.
He hunts for fried chicken.
He hunts because this, I'm conflicted about Tim Walz, who's a vice presidential candidate right now, because I, as a pacifist, have a hard time with somebody who's a hunter. And yet I have a very good friend whose husband hunts. And he says, he eats the food. That's a different thing than hunting for putting a trophy on your wall, right? Hunting because I want to show off my machismo, I have no truck with that. Hunting because we are hunter guys. There's no doubt I may have a steak for dinner tonight. It would be disingenuous of me to say, at that remove that it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people down the road who killed the animal, probably with a stun gun in a slaughterhouse, that I'm okay with it. But, Tim Walz going out and getting dinner for his family. So anyways, but yeah, Ponter has all these things about him. that I wanted to showcase about what can be effective masculinity, and yet it also is cross-species, right, between the woman and the man. And I had to, as brutal as it was to write that brief scene, have Mary, the woman, have reason to really decry the most toxic of masculinity and be open to embracing a whole new version of masculinity. It's very much, it's a feminist novel, and it is also a novel about gender relations as much as it's about interspecies relations.
And healing is definitely part of it.
Absolutely in there. That's right.
Do you
Not
think,
to mention a little revenge. I mean, I don't want to give away anything, but, you know, the rapist definitely gets his comeuppance, too.
though, in a way that allows him to become a better person, which is, I don't want to give away.
No. But yeah. So it's all of this. Everything in life is nuanced, and there's so little in life that really is discussed in a nuanced fashion. And I was so pleased. I was actually asked to be part of a thing called the Pixel Project, which was a international thing that they held for many years of men speaking up against violence against women. And they approached me and said, will you be one of our spokespeople for this? Because of the so sensitive treatment of sexual assault that you had done and the journey of the survivor who had to deal with not just the event. The event is the rapist is gone. The rape victim is a victim till the end of the time. Yeah. And the sensitivity, I was very grateful that I was greeted with that response, that it was a sensitive portrayal.
Absolutely. I could talk to you all day. Unfortunately, I'm getting the wrap-up sign. But quickly, what do we have to look forward from you in the near future?
Well, The Downloaded is my most recent novel. I've just completed an outline for a sequel to The Downloaded, which I thought about calling, because the main character is Roscoe Cadulian, I thought about calling it The Downloaded 2 Electric Caduliu. But I'm not going to do that. And I'm also working on a separate novel about artificial intelligence, which I'm going to read from. We're at DragonCon. I'm going to give my first ever public reading of it tomorrow here at DragonCon.
That is awesome. Anything you want to say to your fans?
I am grateful. The reason I come to DragonCon, the reason I go anywhere is because writing is such a solitary profession. I sit at the keyboard and there's no feedback. And when I come to an event like this and a fine interviewer asks intelligent questions, somebody comes to my autographing and says they love my books. I have somebody come up to me today and say I'm their all-time favorite author. This is the fuel. You said I write to, we have to pay the bills, for sure. But I have to say that the gratification of knowing that you've changed people's lives, and I must say, just to put the button on it, that for Calculating God, I've had so many, which came out 24 years ago, so many people say, I got through my dealing with cancer, or my loved ones dealing with cancer, so much better because I had followed the journey of your character, Tom Jericho, and his dealing with cancer, with, obviously all the debilitations that go with cancer and chemotherapy and so forth, but with the fundamental dignity and aplomb that my character did it. It meant a lot to people, and that meant a lot to me, that it meant a lot to them.
Touching lives is an awesome thing. Thank you so much, Robert.
My pleasure.
And thanks, everyone, for watching. We will see you next time. As always, have fun and follow your fandom.
Good news, everyone! You can subscribe to Fandom Spotlite for free. What? That doesn't seem right. And this says have fun and follow your fandom, whatever that means.